سلام، من مأمن رضایی هستم. امروز با جف کافمن و مارشا راست صحبت میکنم که کارگردان و تهیه کننده فیلم های مستند هستند. من جمله فیلم هاشون نسرین در مورد نسرین ستوده، تحصیل زیر آتش در مورد حق تحصیل بهاییان ایران و هر نمایش زندگی در مورد نمایش نامه‌نویس همجنسگرای آمریکایی ترانس مگنلی است. جف، مارشا، قبل از هر چیز دوست دارم بدونم چی شد که به فیلمسازی رو آوردین و با هم شروع به کار کردین.
Well, as you probably know, we're married and we also work together, but we had careers and lives before that. Interesting, there were many overlaps of interests prior to when we met, which is why I guess we got married, but also why we worked together so well. When I grew up, I think one of the transformational things for me, besides falling in love with the art, was falling in love with old movies and watching movies from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and having that sense of history, but also that sense of rich characters and a narrative that really pulls you in. But I've also always been interested in international affairs and the news. And so I moved from a career in print to radio to making TV documentaries to make my own films. And from the very beginning, besides wanting to have themes that I felt had meaning and richness and could have some impact.
So I had a long career as a casting director and a casting executive for film and television. So I've worked on many films. My first love was actually the theater, and I cast for nearly 40 years. So in 2012, when I first met Jeff, it was really a personal relationship. I mean, I saw his work. Actually, the first piece of work I saw of his was Education Under Fire. His documentary, as you know, about the persecution of the Baha'i faith in Iran. And I began to realize there's sort of all of these pieces, when you make a film, it's such a struggle to actually get a documentary film made, to raise the money, find the financing, all of so many factors. But there's also the other element that when you finish the film, how do you launch the film? How do you get the film seen? And actually that can often be much more complicated and much more difficult than even the process of making the film. And I just started to get more and more involved because these were things that really interested me, and I was also interested in the kind of subject matter that Jeff was interested in as well.
Did a film about jazz and dance in Harlem in the 1930s. Did a film about a Haitian priest who was a champion of women's rights. Did a film about the women who really launched the whole marriage equality movement. We did a film about Broadway and the great playwright Terrence McNally, and a film, among others, about the persecution of the Baha'i faith in Iran, as Marcia mentioned, Education Under Fire. So those all seem really different, and of course now Nasreen, but they're all linked together by people who don't necessarily get the public attention they deserve, but they've done something great outside of themselves to bring people together who are different and to lift lives.
شما فیلم‌های در مورد ایران ساختین. چی باعث شد که به این داستان‌ها رو بیارین؟
Most Americans know very little about Iran. And what we do know is what we read in the newspaper, and which is usually the sort of government stuff. We know that, this is what our government is talking to their, the Iranian government about, or this is the conflict, or this is the danger, the Iran nuclear deal, or, the hostage crisis. This is really what I knew about Iran. But when you begin to make a film like this, what you realize is that really we share a common humanity with people in other countries that we don't get to see. We just don't get to see. We don't have exposure to it. And that became extremely important to us to really bring to the attention of people, not just Nasreen, but this incredible life that's there. It's a beautiful country.
زمینش، فرهنگش، حس هویت مردمش و به اون تعلق دارم، هیچ حس دیگه ای رو نمیتونم بگم. نسرین در واقع دوست داره که همه دنیا بدونن که کشور ما مثل کشورهای دیگه، اما داره که مردم اینجا هم مثل بسیاری از کشورها در آزادی و رفاه زندگی کنن.
فیلم‌های زیادی در مورد ایران توسط فیلمسازهای آمریکایی ساخته میشه و من همیشه فکر میکنم چیزی که از ایران نشون داده میشه کامل نیست، یعنی که به مسائلش آگاه نیستن در فیلماتون یک تصویری از ایران بود که به نظر خیلی واقعی می اومد و من میخوام بدونم روند تحقیقتون در مورد این فیلم ها چیه؟
One thing about particularly making this film was the nature of having the camera people follow Nasreen around in her day-to-day life, and so it gave an intimacy to everything about her life.
The film we did before Nasreen was called Every Act of Life, and it was about the playwright Terrence McNally, who is a giant for the theater and also a giant as an LGBTQ activist, and a powerful person who tragically died of COVID. But when we were working on that film, Marcia said something I thought was just perfect, because, well, she said, you know, we need to make this film for people who know everything about the theater and for people who know nothing about the theater. And that's a tough storytelling challenge, because there's a balance, you know. And the same thing applied to Nasreen and Iran. We had to tell the story for people who knew nothing about Iran, and it was all new. And you couldn't assume they knew about Mossadegh or even, you know, the revolution. And then you needed to tell it for people who grew up there and knew everything. I will say that, you know, when we first reached out to Nasreen through mutual friends and asked if we could do a documentary about her, she was a little skeptical at first. She's a lawyer, you know, that's who she is. But we, I think, shared the same goals, that through her, it would be an introduction really to a wider portrait of Iran and the people of Iran and what she cared about.
And so the feedback from the Iranian community, for me personally, you know, has been the most emotional of all, because of the question that you just asked, that people have been very surprised by us, these two American people, you know, who, you know, were able to show the country in such a loving way. But in a way, we were showing the country through Nasreen's eyes, I think, when I really think about it, because she loves Iran. I mean, she could have left Iran. You know, there's so many questions I had of her, you know, that I was able to get answered, not just through her, but people that we met, you know, her friends and things. But, you know, after her first arrest, and she got out of prison, you know, she could have left, but they could have left the country so many times, but she did not leave the country. She loves Iran. They love it there. They don't want to leave their country. And I think we wanted to capture that Iran. What is this country that Nasreen is willing to be separated from her children for? You know, what is she fighting for? Because she loves this place and she wants it to be a better place.
ما نمیتونیم از رنج و بی‌عدالتی سخن بگیم بی این که از بی‌عدالتی دهه 60 که بر جامعه ما رفته سخن بگیم. زمانی که بحث حقوق زنان در ایران بالا گرفت، زنان از هر طیف فکری بودن کنار هم قرار گرفتن. اصلا موضع‌گیری ایدئولوژی مذهبی یا سیاسی نداشتن. اونها یک خواسته داشتن که برابری حقوقی و انسانی.
با شخصیت شناخته شده کار کردین، مثل جان لوئیس عضو کنگره آمریکا و فعال مدنی، هنرپیشه مثل بیلی پورتر یا کارگردانی مثل جعفر پناهی. چطور این روابط رو برقرار میکنی؟
I think the only way to do a successful film and also to feel right inside is to treat people with as much respect as possible. And so we always try to be honest about what our goals are. As Marcia said, we always try to research everyone we work with so we really know something essential about them and are true to them. But then, since you mentioned John Lewis, I love comparing John Lewis to Nasreen Sotoudeh, you know, who is the subject of Nasreen. John Lewis was rightly an icon of the civil rights movement, and an incredibly brave person, an incredibly humane person. And then he saw that his struggle, his movement, his cause was something universal. And so he brought his attention just from the African American struggle to realize that it was also about women's rights, it was also about gay rights and lesbian rights, that they were all share those same needs and that need for respect and justice. And I love that he came out of himself that way. And he was a leader in each way. And also the thing about John Lewis, unlike some politicians, is he was as great as a human being in person as he was in public, because that's not always the same thing. And I have to say, Nasreen is so much the same. I think one of the reasons I really wanted to do a film about Nasreen was she was a Muslim woman who put everything at risk to help her Baha'i friends and neighbors, and to help, you know, Kurds and Zoroastrians and just a diverse range of people. She realized that we're all in the same boat together. And like John Lewis, you know, she's tough and she's determined and she's strong.
Reza had seen the film first, and then he showed the kids the film, but she hadn't seen the film because she was obviously in prison. But when she came home on the first leave, she saw the film. And when we talked to her, she, you know, she was great. I mean, she was so positive about the film. And, you know, of course, the first thing she says, you know, I all that jumpy footage, you know, I just didn't think you were ever going to be able to make a movie out of it. You know, it was very cute.
یه روز با هم رفتیم کوه سمت گلاب دره، اونجا که قاعدتاً باید جدا می شدیم، دل به دریا زدم و گفتم. احساسمو نسبت بهش گفتم. بله، ما 15 مهر سال 74 بود، عقد کردیم، کاملا خانوادگی بود. تنها فرد غریبه اونجا یه خانم آقایی بودن، اومده بودن فیلم برداری کنن از مراسم عقد. اینا هم بعد از اینکه مراسم تمام شد رفتن خونه، زنگ زدن که کاست درست جا نرفته بوده، کل مراسم ضبط نشده بود. در نتیجه ما هیچی نداریم غیر از چند تا عکسی که اون روز گرفتیم. اصلا برای خود من اصلا اهمیتی نداشت. مهم این بود که ما با هم بودیم. به کاری که نسرین میکرد من خودم هم ایمان داشتم و کمکش میکردم.
موضوعی که در همه فیلماتون دیده میشه مسئله خانواده و به طور کلی تر عشقه. مثلا گفتین که در نسرین رضا خندان رو میبینیم که چطور همیشه از نسرین حمایت میکنه، از انتخاباش حمایت میکنه. ترانس مگنلی رو میبینیم که در دهه 50 در تگزاس دنبال عشق میگرده با جرأت، با وجود اینکه هوموفوبیا طورش خیلی زیاده. اینکه این روابط احساسی رو در فیلم هاتون نشون دادین چه اهمیتی داشته براتون؟
What more wonderful thing to do in a film than to make that something real, and to show that, you know, love and mutual respect and a sense of purpose is obtainable. You know, and I love something about both Terrence and Nasreen. You know, they find a lot of nourishment from their family and friends, but also from smaller things that they see along the way. You know, Terrence talked about the reason we called that film about Terrence McNally, Every Act of Life, is because, you know, every act of life can have something in it that is nourishing and meaningful and important.
Albee said the first time he laid eyes on Terrence McNally, he saw the most beautiful face he'd ever seen in his life.
He said, would you like to come up for a nightcap, which was not very coded for you know what.
Those times were really difficult and frightening for gay men and women.
He started so early to show Americans who gay people are. Terrence did it before anyone else. He did it better than anyone else.
I remember thinking at the end, you know, when we finished the film and I kept watching the film, I thought, well, in the end, this film really became about love. I mean, that's what it really became about. It started out about this man and his life and his work and his passion for his work and his passion for fighting for people's rights. But it really became about love. And when we talk about Reza and Nasreen, I mean, they're not, you know, Jeff knew of Nasreen because of Education Under Fire and was drawn to telling her story because of who she is. But you can't tell Nasreen's story without Reza. He's so intertwined with her story, and as we made the film, and you begin to see what a huge part of her life that he is. They are equals. I mean, it's beautiful because he obviously, from the minute he fell in love with her and wanted to marry her, accepted her desires for the things that she wanted to do as a woman in a very repressive society. You know, he's really shown through all this his own commitment, you know, to fighting for human rights, his wife's rights and everybody else's rights, and the risk that he's been willing to take in his own life, you know, for her, for their children, and for the future of Iran.
موضوع دیگه ای که توی فیلم هاتون خیلی مطرحه مسئله هنر و هنردوستیه. نسرین رو میبینیم که به گالری های هنری میره، برای خیریه عروسک درست میکنه، یا مثلا جوانان بهایی که با وجود که اجازه حق تحصیل ندارن دنبال یادگیری هنر و علم هستن. خودتون نقش هنر رو در این مبارزات اجتماعی مدنی چی میبینید؟
The arts are this amazing process that bring people together. And when you bring people together, you can prompt change. Either just the sense of community and understanding, like in our film, The Savoy King, about this drummer Chick Webb who discovered Ella Fitzgerald. He had all these physical elements, but he was, one of the greatest musicians of his time. But it also portrayed the Savoy Ballroom, which is the first place in America where whites and blacks could go on a dance floor together and dance together. It was a revolutionary act. And that's the arts, doing that, bringing people together.
چرا ما نتونیم از یه جامعه آزاد و دموکراتیک برخوردار بشیم؟ اما اولا خب واقعا باید درجه دانش و آگاهی بالا بره. ما فکر کنیم که باید فرهنگ حکومت عوض بشه، اینطور نیست. فرهنگ عمومی، فرهنگ مردم هم باید تغییر کنه.
Months ago, when she was still in prison, I think this was right about the time she was transferred out of Vivian prison. We were having a Zoom chat with her husband Reza, and he said, "Oh, wait a minute, there's something I want to show you." And he came back and he showed us this. And this is a collage that Nasreen made in Vivian prison. And she went out to a garden of a friend. Because Vivian prison is like one of the worst prisons in the world, but it's also surrounded by gardens and planting. It's strange, and you can hear kids from a school nearby. Very haunting. But she went to a fellow inmate's garden, and she picked this flower and these leaves, and she dried them. Nasreen's name means wild rose, right? Wildflower in Persian. And what better symbol of being in prison but not having your spirit crushed than to show a flower that's preserved and still beautiful, right? So she made this collage out of it, but then another prisoner made the backing of it, and helped her mount it, and another prisoner made the frame for her. And then somehow, I don't know, she was able to get out of prison and get it to Reza, and through certain means, it ended up coming to us months later, and it was an amazing experience to open the box and go, I can't even describe it.
The decision is being called the first of its kind in the nation. Gay couples in Vermont will soon get the same rights and benefits as married heterosexual couples.
It wasn't until after the law passed that things got really ugly in Vermont.
People who had been scared to express their homophobia and their hatred of gay people suddenly felt like they had permission to do so.
Don't tell me to watch my mouth while you're over here teaching these children that it's okay to be gay.
Love is what we're fighting for. Rise up and sing the song of peace.
The battle is by no means over. We had to keep working, however long it took, to get to civil marriage for same-sex couples.
فیلم هاتون به تقلا و رنج‌های انسان میپردازه، از مبارزات نسرین که در موردش صحبت کردیم تا داستان مدعیان، خانواده مدعیان در کیفیت ازدواج. ولی در قلب همه فیلم هاتون یک امیدی به آینده بهتر وجود داره. خودتون این رابطه این دو رو چی میبینین؟ زندگی کردن در روزهای تاریک و تار و آینده، امیدی که به آینده بهتر هست.
I think in order to keep up the fight, like, Terrence did all his life, and certainly, Mary Beth and Susan, and,
In State of Marriage.
in the State of Marriage, Father Joseph, in Haiti, and clearly Nasreen. They believe in the good outcome. They have to. You can't do what these people do unless deep in yourself you really believe it's going to come to something good. You can't, and that's the thing. I think with Nasreen, for me, especially as a mother, That's a question I really wanted to know, that because, you know, could I do something like that? You know, Nasreen, like these other women, they're true believers. You know, they just believe in what they're doing. It's bigger than themselves, and I think that's really what it gets down to for people. That it's what they believe in and what they're trying to accomplish is bigger than themselves, and they believe it in a way that they're very directed. You know, they have a purpose in life. They absolutely have a purpose, and they're very directed towards achieving it.
I think also oppressive regimes want to crush hope. Hope is the spark that brings change. Hope is the spark that makes you want to fight for your opportunity. And so oppressors want to crush that first, before they crush the body, before they crush the mind. It's not just to lock them away, it's to send them a message, and through them a message to everyone else who might want positive change. It's hopeless. And then the fact that these people won't give in to that is just extraordinary. We're talking about John Lewis, the civil rights icon and congressman, and imagine being him when he was about to cross Edmund Pettus Bridge, and he saw this barrage of state troopers with billy clubs, and he knew that they were just going to get their heads beaten in, and yet he kept marching forward anyway. And these women and men in Iran and other political prisoners around the world who do the work anyway, even though they don't go to prison, they might die. I guess part of it is the hope isn't just for themselves, it's a hope for something outside of themselves, bigger than themselves.
فیلم هاتون در مورد ایران مثل نسرین یا تحصیل زیر آتش از حیطه سینما خارج میشن و به کمپین تبدیل میشن. نقش خودتون رو توی آزادی نسرین یا کمک به آزادی نسرین یا حق تحصیل برای جوانای بهایی چی میبینید؟
We've spoken before the European Union, the European Parliament, to the Subcommittee on Human Rights about Nasreen. We've spoken to the global parliamentarians in New Zealand and all kinds of Amnesty International groups, so many groups around the world, legal and law organizations. And of course, Reza, he knows about all of this stuff. He's following what we're doing, and he shares all of this with her. And that's has been hugely important to her that this has happened, and because there's a couple things. I think one thing we come to understand is when people are in prison like this, they fear that people will just forget about them, and that becomes very difficult because you need a reason to go on. And one thing that she told us another time when we saw her when she was home on furlough was that at night when she goes to sleep, when she closes her eyes, she imagines all these different events that we've had around the film that Reza has shared with her, and it makes her hopeful. It makes her hopeful, it gives her hope. And that's been very, very important to us as far as, driving us to keep doing everything that we can, in addition to, of course, doing everything we can because we'd like to get her out of prison.
I think that there's a really important piece there too, which is that oftentimes, if you hear at all about a human rights political prisoner, it's just in passing, or it's abstract, or it seems strange or far away. And it's important to realize that every name you see, and all the names that you never see, are real people with real families, cut off and scared, and at real threat. And so, we've had this direct connection to Nasreen, and to hear about her thinking about some of our work, while she's lying in her prison bed, is deeply moving. But I hope that's a motive for anyone who wants to get involved with human rights, to realize that the work you do does make a difference. There's a real person on the other end of that petition who might benefit from your getting involved in social media on their behalf. And so it's real. And those people, you can save their lives. You can lift their lives.